Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Get Into It with Saafir. Today, I have a distinct pleasure of welcoming a special guest for the conversation on the all important topic where we answer the question: are American schools failing Black students? You can chime in, you can share your feedback by dropping your comments in the chat below. I also invite you to follow our page, like the page, share this broadcast, and make certain that those whom you love are a part of this critical conversation at such a time as this. So before we dispel any additional time and delay any further, let's wait no longer. Let's get into it. Today, I have the distinct honor of welcoming a special guest who will be joining me for this important topic. He is none other than Joel Plummer. He is an award-winning educator and photojournalist whose work has focused on amplifying the voices of people that too often go unheard. He graduated from Rutgers-Newark, where he earned his Bachelor's of Arts in African American Studies and a Master's in History. He has also completed the Rutgers Graduate School of Education Supervisor's Endorsement program. For more than 20 years, Joel has taught African American Studies and U.S. history at the secondary level. For more than a decade, he has also taught in the Africana Studies department at Rutgers University. As a photojournalist, you may recognize his work, where it has been published in the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Daily Beast, Newsweek, NBC, CBS, Sports Illustrated, ESPN, and numerous other international media outlets. His latest book is Sumo Wrestlers and Sports Supermodels: What 20 Years of Teaching Has Taught Me About Saving Black Children from America's Schools. He is a product of the Plainfield Public School District here in New Jersey, and he still lives in Plainfield with his wife, Danielle, and their children, Alexis, Morgan, and Mason. Join me in welcoming the distinguished Joel Plummer. Joel.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Yours is certainly a voice that I think is an authority on this topic. Not only have you gone through 20 years of teaching in the types of environment that give you firsthand knowledge about these issues, but as an author, you brought that to life in your book, Sumo Wrestlers and Supermodels, and What 20 Years Has Taught You. So again, thanks for joining today. I do hope that you are continuing well with this pandemic. And as we come out on the other side, prayerfully, you'll be better for it.
I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. So, Joel, again, thanks for joining. I want to jump right into this conversation because this is one that I think really warrants the fullness of the time slot that we have allowed for it. Because truly, this is a question that burns for many parents in our communities. Are American schools failing Black students? And before we even go any further, I'll give you an opportunity to answer that question.
And I think the answer is overwhelmingly clear that the answer is yes. And I don't think it's an intentional planned failure, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a group of secret meeting of white people that are conspiring to oppress the minds of young Black people, but it's an institutional problem. And the problem in general with Black education is that Black children are suffering in schools because they've been shoehorned into a system that was never designed to meet their needs.
Right.
So different children have different educational needs, and Black people have unique needs based on our unique socio-historical experiences. So those historical experiences shape the way we view the world and what we still need from the world. So that current one-size-fits-all educational model that's largely based on the needs of middle to upper middle class white males is a dangerous fit for Black children. And that's the foundation of the problem.
Absolutely. Before you delve too far into it, I definitely am going to give you an opportunity to expound on how exactly that issue presents so many of the problems that we're seeing today. But before we do that, I want to take this opportunity for our viewers to share some statistics, because these statistics to me tell a very bleak story about the reality that is our current life here in America as Black people. And these statistics don't focus solely on education, but they also focus on some of the results of education. And so I'm going to begin and I'm going to share this for everyone to see. And the first statistic is as follows. This chart highlighted beside us identifies from the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, the adjusted cohort graduation rate for public high school students by race and ethnicity for school year 2017 and 18. This was last updated in May of 2020. And what we can see here is that the graduation rate for Black students is still some of the lowest that we see across racial groups here in America. The total graduation rate we're showing is 85%, but Black students we're seeing are still trailing behind at 79%. Now, while that may not seem like a truly devastating figure, this only accounts for the fact that there's a limited number of students who began high school to begin with, who have already dropped out before these figures were even assessed. So let's move on to the next one, because the story continues to unfold with these data points. The problem that we see that students face, Black students in particular, does not begin in high school. These problems don't start in middle school, high school, or even elementary. These figures that are on your screen now are talking about preschool. 19%. That's the figure. That's the amount of Black boys that make up male preschool enrollment. We make up 19%. But those same Black boys who only make up 19% of male preschool enrollment also represent 45% of male preschool students who are suspended at least once. So we're already beginning to create a barrier for these students because they're getting out of school suspensions in preschool, which in reality, unless there is a significant issue, these are not appropriate responses to behavioral challenges. I want to move on a little bit more, just a few more slides, and then we're going to jump right into the rest of this conversation. But I have to set the stage. Black girls make up 20% of female preschool enrollment, and yet they represent 54% of female preschool students who are suspended at least once. Truly, truly devastating numbers. And I'm going to go to the next one because it continues to build from here. School disciplinary policies disproportionately impact Black students. These zero tolerance discipline policies result in Black students facing disproportionately harsher punishment than their white counterparts in American public schools. As we can see here, public school enrollment is made up of 51% white students and only 16% of Black students. However, the students who receive multiple suspensions, 42% of them are Black, even though we still only made up 16% of that population. Going beyond that, even further, Black students represent 31% of school-related arrests in American public schools. All of these figures are coming from the American Civil Liberties Union. And there's one more statistic I want to show, because this really tells a story about what the school to prison pipeline is and how it's funneled with Black bodies. Students suspended or expelled for a discretionary violation are nearly 3 times more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system the following year. So when you begin suspending students as early as preschool, you are all but guaranteeing their interaction with the justice system the following year, as early as first grade. These tell a bleak story for me. I know for you as an educator and as a father, you share that sentiment. But I want to now turn to you and ask, what do you believe is the most pressing issue within the American education system for Black students?
So all those stats point to what I was saying about the foundational problem is that there's a complete mismatch between what schools currently are and what Black children actually need. And that plays out on a number of levels. You know, those discipline numbers, what that shows me right away is there's a gigantic disconnect between the educators in the room and these Black children.
Yes.
First of all, preschool, suspending kids at preschool is insane.
Yes.
But the root of that problem is, and I talk about in the book, is that there's too many teachers that look at the Black children that they teach as different from their own children or from the children in their neighborhood. There's a dreaded phrase. I hate when teachers say it. The phrase is "these kids." And you'll hear it in teachers' lounges across America.
Yes.
Teachers will say, "These kids don't want to learn. These kids don't know how to behave." That's very different from saying, "My kids are struggling to do this. My kids are struggling to do that." It's these kids. There's a distance. There's me, regular, full, developed human.
Yes.
These things over here.
And you know what it also does?
Go ahead.
Because I think there's a duality of issues there. It definitely creates that separation. It otherizes the students. But what it also does is it puts the onus of education onto these young students. Their inability to learn is not really a reflection of their capacity to understand. It's a reflection of a system that is not designed to meet them where they are.
That's nail on the head. And when you talk about discipline in school, really, and that's, by the way, that's like the number one issue with teachers, right? That's their stress point. They call it classroom management. How to manage these kids, how to keep them in line. But an amazing teacher, one of my mentors, Vanessa Bryan, English teacher at Plainfield High School. Awesome. What she explained to me and crystallized it for me was that, you know, you can't come into a classroom with the idea that I'm the teacher, and because I have the title of teacher, everyone will automatically listen to what I say and follow me because I have a title. And what she pointed out to me so succinctly, so brilliantly, she said, "Plummer, there is no such thing as classroom control. The kids outnumber you 20-1, 30-1. Right. Anytime they want to do something, if they decide to do it, you can't do anything about it." So what do good teachers do? Good teachers make a deal with their students. And what they do is they say to the students or show to the students, "Look, in exchange for your power, I will give you an experience that is so relevant, so useful, so engaging that you'll be willing to exchange your power and control for my information and the experience I'm going to give you." Every single classroom that's out of control, that represents a teacher that could not make that deal with his or her students. The students looked at what the teacher was offering and they were like, "Nope, I don't want to buy that. I'd rather keep my power." And every classroom that's working, those are the classrooms where the teacher's offering something that's so worthwhile that the students willingly give up their control. And so what I'm seeing in those numbers are a bunch of teachers that have not given their students something sufficient to want to have.
That's a great perspective, because what it also shows is that there's an unwillingness to even attempt to understand what drives these students. And not only unwillingness, inherently sometimes there's this issue, because you know as well as I know that we lack in the numbers of teachers that look like us in the classroom. Black male teachers are the least amount proportionately that we see within the classroom. I can count on one hand how many black male teachers I've had in the entirety of my schooling, from preschool to college. And I went to a historically black college and university. So it's mind-blowing that that issue itself is still not rectified. But in the absence of addressing that issue, teachers who most likely, because of that fact, come from a different environment, are traveling into where students live to teach them, are expecting them to relate to their experiences, or expecting them to adapt to a curriculum that doesn't honor what experiences these students have had.
And that, I always say, the number one, the first lesson, the first thing any good teacher has to do is you have to know your students.
Absolutely.
That's the key to everything. You have to know your students. And my test of a new teacher, if I want to know if a teacher has potential or not, simple question. Can you have a 30-minute discussion with the children in the classroom that's not related to schoolwork? Just about their lives and what's happening. Because if you can do that, that means you know enough about their world to come up with examples that relate to them. You have some idea what they watch on TV, what they listen to, what's important to them. Like, if you can get that conversation going and maintain it, that means you know something about those kids. But if the only thing you can talk about is what's on page 19, you're gonna have some problems. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. You can have a PhD from Harvard. You can be the most articulate person in the world. None of that impresses kids.
Right.
It's the cliche, but it's true that people that teach kids don't care what you know until you show that you care.
Right. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
There you go. Right.
Absolutely true. There's a question in the chat, and I think it's an important one that we should address. It comes from Alex Hayes. And Alex is asking, how critical is it for diverse school districts with non-diverse faculty to have equity coaches on staff? And have you seen success with these specialized educators?
I have never worked in a district that offered that type of commitment in any way. I think that's a great idea. To have someone that's willing to do that, to have a district that's willing to invest in that. But before you even get that, there has to be some type of culture change in the district for them to recognize that that's even a problem that needs to be addressed before they put any resources towards it. So that's an amazing idea. But the larger problem is convincing these districts and the teachers within them that this is a real problem. Because one of the easiest things to do and detrimental things to do is to have the attitude as an adult that I have the answers and it's up to you as kids to adjust your life, your way of thinking to me so you can get them.
Absolutely.
And just to show how that works over the years, when you're in kindergarten and preschool, kids have a world in school that's tailored to meet their needs, right? The chairs are lower, the desks are lower, the bathrooms are like 3 inches off the ground. Everything's tiny, it's colorful, it's full of life. Because what's the thinking? Well, this is a new experience for them. We have to meet them where they are and give them an experience that matches who they are. But each year as you go older, the attitude changes. The attitude is, You need to adjust to us. So it's a high school with 2,000 kids and 150 teachers. And instead of making the 150 teachers adjust to the 2,000 kids, we say, no, all you kids, you have to adjust to what the adults, how the adults view the world.
And that in itself, I think, really provides a key summary of the types of issues that these kids face. Because not only are you being pigeonholed into a system that is archaic in its design, when in fact, at that time, it was designed to benefit a specific set of citizens in the country, white males initially, and then white males and females thereafter. By the time that we entered the equation, where we were allowed to learn to read, allowed to participate, allowed to integrate into these schools, we had already lost so much. But not only were repairs not done for the loss that occurred then, the loss is perpetuated today because of the fact that they still have yet to adjust to our needs and therefore keep creating a larger and larger achievement gap, not only with education, but also in the workforce, also with business ownership. And in fact, there's a statistic I have right now. In 2019, of all of the businesses that were owned by individuals in America, and that figure was, I'll give you some figures now. So, of the businesses owned in America, 40% of those were owned by non-Hispanic whites, age 25. Actually, just a moment. Okay, Hispanic-owned businesses at the time were 331,000. And that's 5% of all businesses. Asian-owned businesses were 578,000. That's 9% of all businesses. Today, during the last census, we made up about 13% of the population. And of all of the businesses owned in 2019, only 124,000 were owned by Black people across the country. That's less than 2% of all businesses. So this to me is another indicator of the attainment, because seeking out the American dream, pursuing the American dream requires that we have adequate education to prepare us for the world following high school. Today, it's fairly common to see that Black schools or schools with predominantly Black students or any large percentage of Black students are no longer teaching the arts in many cases. They're no longer teaching any of the ancillary subjects where you can go right into the workforce without going into college. And I can't think of the name of it, vocational education.
Right.
That's no longer being taught in many of the schools where they're largely attended by Black students. And then the education, the standard curriculum for English, we know that the way that English is taught in many cases is foreign because we're not represented in what we're learning. We're not represented in the testing. And many times teachers are forced to teach to the test, as opposed to giving students the opportunity to truly become self-determined in what they pursue after education. So that gives me the perfect segue to turn to your book, Joel. And I want everybody on this broadcast, if you have not yet gotten the opportunity, make sure that you get the book. The name of the book is Sumo Wrestlers and Supermodels: What I Have Learned, or What 20 Years of Education Have Taught Me About Saving Black Students from the American School System. I'm going to drop that link in the chat so everyone can go and grab the book when you get an opportunity. But Joel, in the title of the book, I found it quite interesting. You called it Sumo Wrestlers and Supermodels. Now, at first, I did not know what that meant. I had no idea where you were going with that title. And then I began reading the book, and I realized that it is indicative of the fact that we try and pigeonhole students into a system that's not made for them, that's not designed to meet their needs inherently, even if unintentionally. All right, so it sort of juxtaposes the unique needs of these vastly different students, a sumo wrestler and a supermodel, and then the resulting paradox that occurs when you try to serve these students with a one-size-fits-all education. Tell me about the title, and then tell me how this book serves as a beacon of light for change in our system.
Okay. So I'm going to connect the title to the book to those stats that you just gave out about business. So stick with me here. So the title of the book refers to an analogy that I use when I teach about the struggle of Black people to try to get a quality education in America. And what I argue is this. It's nice to believe that everyone is the same and that color doesn't matter, and that you can just, forget about the past and just move on from here, all holding hands, sliding down a rainbow into a better future. But the reality is Black people's unique circumstances have created unique problems. And I always remind people that, and when I do my presentation on this, I have a timeline. Okay. And on the timeline, I show Black people's journey throughout American history. And if you divide American history up, the largest portion of it is the era where America allowed Black people to be owned as property, as slaves, right? From 1619 in Jamestown to 1865. Then there's a period of about 100 years where Black people are legally discriminated against. And by legally, I don't mean that it's okay to be racist towards Black people, that it's just tradition. I mean, it's law. It's law that you have to be racist against Black people. It's illegal to allow Black people into that school, into that business, into that church. That it's literally illegal. It was illegal for Black people to look white people in the eyes or walk on the same side of the street. It was illegal in some places for Black people to be allowed to fish, hunt, or farm because they didn't want Black people to become self-sufficient. Right. They wanted Black people to be dependent on white people. Right. And this wasn't just custom. All these things are laws. So some state representative wrote a bill, took it to the floor of their legislature. They voted on it, passed it. And that's what makes the story of Black people in America unique from other groups. Lots of ethnic groups face some type of discrimination, but Black people's discrimination was codified. It was built into law. And then even after those laws were struck down, were deemed not constitutional, you still have the 50s and 60s civil rights era where Black people responding to white people's refusal to follow the new rules. And so Black people, if you look at the timeline of Black people in America, you really have from about 1968 to the present, where Black people are full human beings on paper. That's it. And let me make it more personal. If you look at my family, my father's done some research on our family tree. The oldest person that he's been able to find goes back to 1828, right? From 1828 to now, I am the first generation of my family to be born with full rights in America.
Wow.
The very first generation.
Wow.
My children are only second generation. So you're going to tell me that people that come from that history need the same things from a school system as white people? It doesn't.
And or need to just accept what's available, pull up their britches and get over it?
Right. It's impossible. So let me bring it back to the title. So what I argue is that since Black people have unique circumstances, they have unique problems, that they need unique solutions. And the function of an education, John Henrik Clarke says this, and I agree, it should be power. That should be the ultimate goal, power. But the way the system works now is this one size fits all designed largely for white males. The system is designed to maintain the current power structure. So it teaches you how to fit in and maintain and survive in the current structure, which is great if that structure works for you. So, but for Black kids, they don't need to learn how to maintain the power structure, maintain power. They need to learn how to get it,
Right.
how to obtain power. That's a different education. And so I argue that, look, mismatching those educations is as dangerous as, let's say you have someone that wants to be a sumo wrestler.
Right.
And so they get a trainer, but the trainer is actually an expert in supermodels.
Right.
So this person that wants to be a sumo wrestler is getting taught how to eat like a supermodel, dress like a supermodel, exercise like a supermodel, have the mentality of a supermodel. Now, what's going to happen to that person when they go into the ring against a real, properly trained sumo wrestler? They're going to get obliterated.
Absolutely.
And it's not because the trainer wasn't a good person. It's not because the trainer wasn't an expert in their field. It's a mismatched curriculum.
Yes.
It doesn't meet the person's real world circumstances. And so that's the name. That's the why I titled the book Sumo Wrestlers and Supermodels. And let me show you how this works in the real life, going back to your numbers. Yeah. This is the proof that the education is mismatched. We have Black people with business degrees, with finance degrees, with MBAs. If that's the case, shouldn't we have tons and tons of Black-owned businesses? Right. Shouldn't Black communities be filled with giant Black business districts?
Yes.
Not. Something's wrong if your education is just training you to work for someone else.
Absolutely.
And that's what our education does. Because it doesn't empower us. Milano Karenga has a great definition of power. He says power is the ability to define yourself, to defend define yourself and your interests, to defend yourself and your interests, and to be able to do it even in the face of opposition.
Now that's a great point, because you just mentioned moments ago, and this is in the book, everybody. So again, get the book. The link is in the chat. Get the book. You will not be sorry that you got it. You just mentioned that education's goal is power. Now, I know you define power in the book, but power in practice is self-determination of your interests regardless of your circumstance. And this determination is only possible because or when you are afforded specific tools, freedoms, and supports to pursue your interests. If your education doesn't prepare you to pursue your interests, it's only preparing you to fit into a category that already has a limited space and a capacity for it. There's already a limited space to fit into the current construct, and those seats are largely reserved for the individuals who do not represent who you are or what you look like. And that is why it is of utmost importance that our education system change, that the purpose of our education system changes, that for Black students, it prepares them, to your point, to obtain power rather than maintain a structure that keeps us oppressed by design inherently, and of course, by doing so, enriches those who are oppressing.
And you hit the nail on the head. And some people, and some Black people take offense when I say that Black people are powerless in America.
Right.
But then I say, all right, here's a simple test. Let's look at the basic needs of life. Can you get water without white people? Can you get electricity without white people? Can you get a mortgage for your home without white people? Can you get internet access without white people? Can you get clothing? Can you get food without white people? And if the answer to that is no,
right,
there's a problem. You are effectively powerless. And you hit a key point that people get distracted. You talked about reserved seats, right? That most of the seats are taken. And there's a couple of seats where people of color can get into. And then what happens when you have that one Black person that gets into that spot? Much of mainstream white America will say, see, that person, that one exceptional Black person did it. He didn't complain about the system. So all of you just need to work harder, and you can be like, I don't know, let's call him Bob. You can be like Bob over there.
Yeah. But and I have a real life example too. And I want to share this. And of course, I want to be sensitive to the fact that it is a real example that I've lived with. But this happened some years ago. All right. So it's none of my current affiliations. But some years ago, I wanted to hire a candidate for a position that I posted. We had seen a number of candidates, maybe 10, 15 candidates. We narrowed it down to two. I'm the hiring manager, right? Now, at my level at the time, I was the only black person in the organization, period. The organization had about 2,000 employees. And at my level at the time, I was the only black person in the organization. I attempted to hire this candidate based on her qualifications. She happens to be a woman of color. And the number two candidate, at least based on all the feedback from all of the other interviewers, which included the chief public affairs officer and the CEFO, they were, well, two of them out of the 10 people that conducted interviews were sold on hiring this man who happened to be white. Now, I knew right away during my interview that one, he lied on his application. He did not have a degree. And the experience that he listed on his resume was also inaccurate. Contrasting that, this woman of color, not only did she have a degree, but she was also a chair on the board of the association, the national association that we leverage for one of our practices. Try not to give away too many details.
Gotcha.
And the only thing they could say was that it's more difficult for them to understand her communication than it was for them to understand his.
Wow.
My hands were completely tied, and they insisted on hiring him. Now, the slap in the face was that upon making the offer, he then took the offer that they made at a rate which was far beyond what he deserved. He took that offer and used it as leverage at a different company to get a better paying job and spat in their face and didn't even accept the job. Meanwhile, I had to turn this young lady away because of this type of environment that perpetuates these ideas that black people are incapable of succeeding.
And you know what? And at the end of the day, right, the people involved in that will say, hey, look, I'm not a racist. I don't call black people bad names. Right. I've been to a Black Lives Matter protest. I check on my black friends to make sure that they're okay. But this is the stuff that matters. It's the actions that matter. I have a friend who always talks about Howard Brown, a professor at NYU, but he always talks about how it's great to have white allies that offer verbal support. But the question is, what sacrifice are you willing to make to help black people?
Right.
Even a minor thing that doesn't even hurt you personally, like offering this job to a qualified black woman instead of a white person, doesn't even hurt you personally.
Right.
It just requires you a mental sacrifice for you to see someone in a position that you're not used to seeing, and they couldn't do it. And that's the hard part of rooting out racism in America. It's not the crazy white supremacists yelling and waving a Confederate flag. Those people are easy. It's those people in that hiring room that are the challenge.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, because if the education system had prepared her, and me for that matter, to actually lead and to pursue my interests, perhaps she wouldn't even be looking for a job to work for someone else, but she would be in a seat where she's empowered to make those decisions herself.
You know what? I always give this example for my kids, when my students, when I teach the history of slavery, and I talk about fearing white people. And one of the examples I give, and I say this fear still is with us today, the fear that black people had instilled in them during slavery. One of the current examples of that is names. And this is going to be connected to doing for self. And I can't tell you how many times Black people will say, well, look, I've seen the study such and such. Make sure you don't name your kid no super Black name or some name that's going to be associated with Africa, because it's going to hurt their prospects in the future. And that may or may not be true, but I always say, think about that. Let's say you're an average parent, like you're not a Hall of Fame parent, you're like a C minus parent, right?
Right.
But even if you're that parent, your child is the most precious thing in the universe to you. And you'll let some imaginary white person that your kid may or may not meet in the future determine the name of your own child without even being told.
Right.
And I say the problem with that is you already envision your child as a person that has to go to white people and beg them for a job.
Not only that,
your child as the person behind the desk interviewing people to give out the job, because your name could be your last name could be Kill Whitey, but if you're offering a job that has $250,000 a year in benefits, you'll have a line of white people lining up behind your desk saying, "This Mr. Kill Whitey, can I let me tell you why I need to work for you." It won't matter what your name is if when you're the person that's running the show.
So, Joel, you're a great educator. You're a great photojournalist. I did not know you were a comedian. So that is good. But the reality is, not only does that reaction of the Black parent indicate that they view their child as being relegated to a seat underneath somebody else's power structure, but it also is an indicator of the fact that we see the problems that exist, and we are largely taught or disempowered, and therefore result in accepting them as they are. The fact is that it's a problem that if your name is African sounding or doesn't sound European, that you're less likely to get a call back when your resume is submitted. It's a problem that when you get interviewed, and if you are, or if your picture is on your resume, you could perhaps be overlooked because of the fact that you are Black. It's a problem that because of the color of your skin, you will be pigeonholed or relegated to positions or roles that are beneath your potential. But the biggest problem is the fact that we are made to believe that nothing can be done about it, and it should be accepted as it is, much like the school system that doesn't prepare us for the future that we deserve.
And it goes back to that to discussion about power. Black children aren't taught to gain power. They're taught to be workers, and workers aren't generally trying to. Workers come to work.
Right.
You stay quiet. You keep your head down. You make money. You go home. You're not being trained. You're not being educated to be that person in control, or to even think that you have the power to change the system.
Right.
But this is a very American thing. America doesn't really celebrate people that try to disrupt the system. And this is why schools continue, like the stuff we're saying. I'm sure there's millions and millions of people that say, yep, that's a problem with the school. Those problems do exist. But why don't they change? And I always say, you have to remember, school is an institution. Mm-hmm. And institutions don't look for revolutionaries. They don't look for people that are going to come in and disrupt the institution.
Right.
They look for people that already match the ideas, the beliefs, the practices of the institution. And that's why they say, oh, he's a good fit, she's not a good fit. Because they want to maintain what they already are. So think about teachers. I'm a teacher in training. I'm in college. Mm-hmm. I want a job. So do I go into an interview with plans to upend everything and be a revolutionary? Or am I trying to fit in? I want to make sure this person interviewing sees me as one of the club, as envisions me as someone that can fit in with what's already here. Yeah. And what that does is it maintains the system as is. And in one of the chapters in my book, I say, you know, for teachers, school's a giant system. It's hard to just change stuff on the fly. You can say, I want to change a book, right? That doesn't happen overnight. Well, you have to find the new book. You might have to get multiple bids from different sellers who are selling the book. It has to get approved by a curriculum committee. It has to go through all this stuff, right? But what I tell teachers all the time, all right, you can't change the world yourself. But in your classroom, your little corner of the world, you can, I don't care what the curriculum says, you can find a way to make it relevant and empowering to your students. And you can't use the excuse, well, the school won't let me do this or that. Because those kids, there's a lot of things you can replace in life, but time is not one of them.
You're absolutely right.
Those kids spending a year with you, if you waste their time at the end of the year, right, you can make all excuses you want, well, why you didn't teach them anything meaningful. But at the end of the year, they're not going to say, oh, yeah, Mr. Plummer's class was horrible, but it's not his fault because systematic racism made him have to stick to this curriculum, so I'm going to give him a pass. What they'll remember is Mr. Plummer was horrible. And teachers have to understand, no one, when you give a bad educational experience, no one's going to blame the superintendent. They're not going to blame the Board of Ed. They're not going to blame the larger system. They're going to look directly at you. And because of that, I have this chapter, and I say, teachers, sometimes you have to manage up. You have to be bold, do something new in your classroom, and once people see that it works, the people above you will get on board. But you have to have the courage to do what you know in your mind and in your heart is best for the kids, no matter what.
It's just like economics. You know, the trickle down theory or strategy does not work at all. To think that you'll hand someone who is in power these tools, these resources to disseminate and trickle down to make a positive impact throughout the school system is just a farce. Because what generally will happen is they will find ways, of course, in their comfortable corners to maintain the comfort that they enjoy and employ practices that make it appear as though they're distributing these funds equitably in an effective way, and then blame the student for failing in the end. You know, one of the things that you wrote about in your book, and I think it's a very powerful statement, it's about the fact that where we are today in our school system is not much different than where we were immediately following integration of schools. You know, during slave times, you say illiteracy was a powerful weapon in the slave owners' fight to control the behaviors of enslaved Black people. The fact that illiteracy was the weapon that they used against us then has not in itself changed all that much. It means that we really set ourselves up for failure when we continue to expect more out of a system that has already failed us and has been proven to do so time and again.
Absolutely. All right. You can't know to fight against something if you don't even have the knowledge that is wrong. You know, it's one of the things that makes the internet powerful. Like people say you can look up anything on the internet, right? Right. But you have to know to look up something. You have to know something already to dig deeper into something. If you can learn how to start your own business on the internet, but before that, you have to have a reason to look up how to start your own business. And I argue that one of the failures of schools when it comes to Black education is this massive focus on controlling Black bodies instead of freeing Black minds. There's so much emphasis on behavior, and you know, controlling what the physical body does instead of what their mind is capable of. And it's kind of callous. Like, check this out. I was just thinking about this the other day. Let's look at school uniforms, right? Yeah. Take a place, and people say, well, the uniforms, you know, stop kids from teasing kids that don't have a lot. It makes them more focused on school, all these great things. And I say to that, It's like I get the idea,
Right.
but there's several problems. One is I think it's messed up that instead of that kid that teases another kid for the way they look, the way they dress, instead of addressing their lack of empathy for another human, we'll just cover it up.
Mm.
And then there's the other thing. There's this thing about well, you know, in some places you got to worry about people wearing certain colors. It means certain things. It could lead to violence. Someone could get hurt for wearing the wrong thing. And so we just put them in uniform, so we have to deal with that. But I said, wait, think about it. You mean some kid lives in a neighborhood that's so dangerous that they could get hurt or killed for wearing for what they wear. And your solution to a kid living in that traumatic, stressful, dangerous environment is change your clothes, son.
Wow.
Right? We're not going to deal with the violence. We're not going to deal with the anger that exists in the community and the self-hate that exists in the community that could lead to that violence. Instead, we say, well, change your clothes and we don't have to worry about that.
You know, it really goes to show how resistant the powers that be are to change. Not only resistant to change, but really they're insistent on maintaining the status quo. You keep talking about it, you bring it back up where they want to maintain the power structures that exist today because of the fact that it benefits them. Disproportionately, albeit, it still benefits them, and therefore they're not ready to relinquish that type of control. But it goes back to the same point as the school uniforms. It doesn't get to the root of the problem. It doesn't address the fact that these problems exist in the first place. All it does is it covers up. So the same type of response is given when we hear things like the 1619 Project, for example, putting out this curriculum that they want to teach about the horrors of our past so that can really empower change for our future. And what type of response do we get from the government at the highest levels? We get a completely whitewashed and prettified curriculum that tries to hide the fact that these atrocities existed and occurred in the first place, and instead tell a story which is fictional to make everybody feel better. Well, what I am is I'm tired of our children being at the receiving end of being underdeveloped, certainly underserved, all in the name of hiding the truth because it's too painful for an oppressor to look at themselves and see themselves in a way that we've seen for far too long.
That's it. America always punishes, has a long history of punishing people that make white people feel guilty about white privilege, about the advantages of racism, and it celebrates people that assuage white people's feelings of guilt.
Yeah,
it's always been that way. And what I liken it to is I get how people want to skip to the happy ending.
yes.
I get that, but you have to deal with the past problems. So let's say a man cheats on his wife, right, on a Monday, and then Monday night he apologizes. Tuesday
Right.
says I'm not going to do it again. Tuesday, his wife is still angry with him, and he's like, "Well, why are you still mad? That was the past. I'm not cheating on you right now. So why can't we just move on?" Well, you did a lot of damage that we have to deal with the damage that you've done in the past. There's a lot of apologizing. There's a lot of flower bringing that you have to do. You have to make up for what you did, and you have to reestablish that you can be trusted.
And you have to invest, right, in that marriage to make it work, because you need to repair all the wrongs that you've done. We see the same exact problem. I'm so glad you provided that example, because it takes a really responsible party to look at himself, recognize and acknowledge all the wrong that he has done, admitting it, and then laying himself at the mercy of the court so that he can then address those issues before he moves on. rather than the type of person that we see in our microwave society where everything is fast forward, let's get beyond it and get over it, who seeks to hide the wrongs that he's committed so that everybody can just smile in his face and he doesn't have to face the responsibility or be accountable for what he's done. My question to you, Joel, is this. How would you fix the school systems? And this is a big question. It's short, but it's a big question. How would you fix, based on your experience, 20 years, more than 20 years, and you've done this at the collegiate level, the secondary level, and in multiple different environments. What would you say you can do one way that you could achieve fixing American school systems as it relates to how Black students are underserved?
I think one of the biggest changes that has to happen is that we have to reimagine what school is. And I think it's centered around the counseling part of school. I think we need to move in urban schools. We need to move from a model where like the guidance department is just this thing on the side, this ancillary thing on the side that mainly is responsible just for making schedules. And that has to become the center of the school. Because I've seen some stuff in the chat. People are talking about kids on drugs. There's kids on drugs. There's kids that are angry. There's lots of hurt kids, but they're hurt. They're traumatized as children.
Right.
And they will never learn at their highest level while they're trying to deal with their trauma and suffering on their own. And so there has to be a massive investment in the counseling portion of school, because that kid that's hungry, that kid that's angry, that kid that's scared, that kid that's insecure about where home is going to be next week. He doesn't care about your algebraic equation.
Right.
He doesn't care about your Emily Dickinson poem. That has to be dealt with first. So you have all these guidance counselors are highly trained counselors, but they almost never get to reach their full potential because here's 500 kids for you to deal with.
Well, that disparity, I think it's even far worse in other centers of education. I mean, in Newark, for example, we don't even have guidance counselors in every school building. So
wow.
there's guidance counselors have to share buildings, which, you're talking about an innumerable number of students that you have to account for. So the types of services that they're getting, they're not really accessible. And it's already difficult enough because you can never expect someone who has been traumatized. You can't expect the traumatized to articulate their trauma and then to effectively get beyond it without that type of counseling. And so our students are at a disadvantage because they're already left behind and left to face their traumas alone, or at least with a family that's facing it together, but they still are not getting the support that they need to get beyond it so that they can then start to address the holes in the education system. But I defer back to you. I just had to get that out because
but that's it. And what you're saying is true. And I write about in the book that, and instead of investing more into the counseling portion of schools are cutting their guidance departments.
Right.
Because we're in a system where if it doesn't show up on the standardized test, then we don't really need to fund it.
Yes.
But it's absolutely crucial that we start dealing with these kids' mental health. Look, if you have a kid that's acting up, a kid that's violent, that's angry, the solution is not to get rid of them. Right. You have to deal with their root problem. Because I tell you, there's not a single kid anywhere that wants to be a bad person, that wants to be a disruption, that wants to be the person that stresses everyone else out. Every kid wants to be happy, wants to be loved, wants to be included. But if you have this idea that, well, some kids just can't be helped, so we're just going to throw them out, just throw them away, right? It's not going to work. We have to double down. Oh, and this is it in a nutshell. One of the things that makes me cringe is when teachers say, look, I'm just a teacher. I'm not your mother. I'm not your psychologist. I'm not blah, 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 blah. I would argue, here it is in a nutshell. the fundamental change that has to happen is that in urban schools, the
Mm-hmm.
school needs to do every single thing that a family used to do.
Mm.
So if that means feeding kids, we have to be prepared to feed kids. If it means giving kids a place to play, it means giving them a place to play. If it means finding them, making sure that they have a place to live, they have electricity, it has to do that. If it means giving hugs, making someone feel good, forget the curriculum. If someone just needs to feel good about themselves for a day, for an hour, for a minute, we have to do that. Everything that the family is supposed to do, we can't assume that is happening, and we need to be prepared to fill all those gaps. It is your job to be everything for those kids.
Absolutely. And you know what? There's a chat comment in the chat. Comes from a brother named Dion. He says that parents need to be more involved in board meetings and keep in touch with counselors. And while I would agree that that may address some of the challenges that exist, the fact remains that when we're talking about communities of color, Black communities, you will largely find that parents have to work. If there's a two-parent household, perhaps both have to work. But in large part, we're talking about one-parent households where parents oftentimes have to work multiple jobs. So even their capacity to participate is already restricted. And so we have these challenges that, again, of course, become more, I guess they become exasperated because of the fact that there's competing priorities that have to be met in order to even maintain a life worth living. We also have these challenges where a lot of times the answer to these problems from a school system is to really just become more selective in who they serve. And we see that when we have environments where students have to test to get into the school, or perhaps there's a certain number of slots available and you know that it's the better school and they can only serve so many. But even the mechanisms that they use to identify which students that they will serve oftentimes put the most vulnerable students on the back burner simply because they haven't met prior requirements or they haven't checked the box in certain areas, and therefore they are left out of the equation and have to fend for themselves. If we already lack the capacity to serve all of these students, changing our school system has to be a system-wide initiative, because the fact that we have so much autonomy where these schools operate so differently, and then you only are allowed to have so many, obviously because of space and capacity, we are still not doing enough to service the students who are most vulnerable.
Yep. And NOAA would go a long way to fixing some of those problems. And it probably will never happen, at least not in New Jersey.
And what's that?
Fund all the schools equally. Put all the money in the state in one big pot, one education pot, fund everyone equally. But the richer schools, richer districts will never allow that to happen, right? They don't want to waste their money on those kids.
And that's actually very revealing about a problem that we have in New Jersey. Whereas you're expected to go to a school, required to go to a school within a certain
radius
from your zip code. So that already means that whatever problems already existed due to lower home ownership, lower economic standing for certain cities or districts, again, they're exasperated because now you're relegated to being taught there where you're underfunded. Certainly the taxes are not going toward it, not home ownership taxes. When you have home ownership at such a low rate in these cities and the home value is so much lower, then there really is no other solution if not for that equal funding, because you're at a disadvantage that you can't climb out of. And then what do we have when we put crabs into a barrel and there's no real room to escape? Everyone's climbing all over top of each other, kicking the rest down so they can get out themselves.
And you know, you said that, you're right, that's the predictable outcome. And that it's interesting that you brought up the property tax thing. And the property value, remember, that's just subjective. It's just made up. Yes, it's just based on people's feelings. So where I live in Plainfield, I literally live a half block away from the next town over, which is Fanwood, predominantly white town. If my house was a half block over, it'd be worth another $15,000, $20,000. And that's not based on anything real except the perception that a whiter town is better. And because a whiter town is perceived to be better, the value of the homes go up, which means the property taxes go up, which means the school can get better funded. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the fact that they are able to highlight the disparities as somehow a win for those affluent townships or districts is appalling. How can you put up a chart and say, hey, we achieved more, we have more resources, all our kids have books? But why? Is that really something that you want to stand on as an achievement when in reality, all it is you further oppressing the already oppressed by not funding with the monies needed so that there could be true equity or educational justice in this country?
Yep. And that is the challenge. And and they'll look at the kids and they'll look at a kid in Newark, and they'll say, that kid, if he was just more focused, he should have been more ambitious, should have been more disciplined. There's this thing where people try to apply personal solutions to institutional and systematic problems.
Yes.
So you as an individual, you're supposed to be able to overcome this entire system. And if you don't, that's proof that it'd be a waste of money for the system to invest more money into you. Like it's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. Our children in general, Black students, just by virtue of all the issues that we talked about historically, those elements that continue to fuel this gap in educational attainment, it's again further exasperated by the fact that our students go unsupported, that there have been no real repairs made for the injustices wrought against our people for so many years. And then now to be expected to just perform and to compete in an environment that is not even really set up for you to thrive.
Right.
It really is not just a disadvantage. It's a closed door with a lock on the outside where you don't have access to even get out.
And that goes back to my sumo wrestlers and supermodels analogy, right? You're not set up to win. Yeah, that sumo wrestler that's trained by a supermodel coach is not set up to win. But look, here's where it gets a little bit dangerous. But let's say you have some exceptional human that's been trained like a supermodel, exercising, eating like a supermodel, but somehow turns out is like they were a physics genius, and they find a way, even though they're 3 times smaller than a real sumo wrestler, to win. Mm-hmm. People say, "See, right? That person did it," and that's the proof that there's nothing wrong with the system. The rest of y'all just aren't working hard enough.
Right.
Barack Obama became president of the United States. America must be fine for Black people. And it's the exceptional Black person gets used as the proof that the rest of Black people just aren't working hard enough.
Joel, do you think that there are types of school systems that are in existence today that might already be set up to address some of these woes? I ask because, we have all of these different types of schools: parochial, Catholic, private, charter public, traditional public, as well as cooperative schools and Montessori schools. Do you think any of these really have at least some structure that creates an answer or provides an answer to some of these problems?
Yeah, I think there are definitely schools out there doing good work. And I think the schools, among the best of those schools, are schools that are part of, I don't want to get the organizations wrong, but it's like an organization of independent African-centered schools. There's a lot in the Philadelphia area where they're not even charter schools. They're independent Black schools that aren't beholden to anybody except their students and their parents. And much of this stuff is being done in those types of schools. And I think the different learning methods like Montessori and all that, all those are good. But what my point in all this has always been, you just have to see children as individuals and communities as individual communities. And you have to figure out what best meets the real life needs of the community that the school is in.
Right.
So a community shouldn't have to adjust to a school. School needs to adjust to the community.
Yes. Yes. No, that's absolutely true. Joe, I mean, I'm really grateful that you decided to join on today. I'm so thankful that you have provided such insights based on your experience as an educator and in many different environments. If there's anything that parents can walk away from this conversation knowing that they have the power to change, what one thing would you tell them?
Parents, do not be afraid to question what is happening in the school. Parents, I think, sometimes underestimate how powerful their voices are. A parent phone call has a lot more power than you may imagine. And 10 parents calling, that's like an army coming to a school and asking for change. So don't be afraid to use that power. And don't be afraid to demand that your children are included in the curriculum. Think of an all-white town, right? Imagine an all-white town where every day the kids only learn Black history, Black literature, Black art, Black politics from a Black point of view. You think those parents, those white parents, would sit back and be like, okay, it is what it is.
Right.
They would come to that school with torches and pitchforks. But we accept it. The same thing happens to us every day across America. Black children sit in schools all day learning about everyone except for themselves. And we take it. And you don't have to. You have the right, the absolute right, and I would say even obligation as a parent to demand that your child gets taught themselves. Yeah. You should not go through 13 years of a school system and not be able to talk about your own history, your own culture, your own worldview. So parents, absolutely go ahead and make noise. Be the parent that when you come to the school, people roll their eyes like, oh, here we go again. Because that's what you have to do. And as a shameless plug, I would also argue that my book gives a lot of things that you should be looking for in your teachers when you evaluate the teachers and then you evaluate a school. Go through it. It's a short book, but go through it. Say, is my school doing these things?
Yeah.
And if not, make some noise.
Wonderful. Well, Joel, thanks again for joining today. Definitely some sound advice, parents. Make sure that you are the loudest one in the room when necessary, but show up and show out if you have to. You have to question everything. Make certain that administrators understand that you are not only aware of what's happening, but it concerns you greatly. So, Joel, thanks again for joining us. Where can anybody find you if they need to?
Thank you for having me. Easiest place to find me is my website, joelplummer.com. It has all my social media links, and it has my bio and all of my books, all of my work is at joelplummer.com.
Awesome. Everyone, I just dropped that in the chat. Please be sure to make note of it. You can find Joel at joelplummer.com. His book, Sumo Wrestlers and Supermodels, what 20 years of teaching has taught me about saving Black students from American schools, can be found on Amazon. It's been in the link throughout the broadcast in the chat. Please be sure to grab you a copy. Joel, thanks again for joining. I'm so grateful for the rich conversation. More importantly, as is always the goal of our broadcast, we want to make sure that you are empowered to make a difference where you are so that you can get to where you need to be without undue oppression. Thank you for joining us. You have just witnessed another episode of Get Into It with Saafir. It is because of you that we do this in hopes of empowering you to be who you desire to be through the process of self-determination and to grant yourself the ability not only to overcome, but to thrive wherever you find yourself. Thank you again. Signing off.